Hickman, a native of Iowa. Could be a relative of mine, who knows? I'm from Iowa. Lauren's work has been called both fierce and vulnerable, the variety of her experience lending to the unique voice of an old soul, both troubled and transcendent. Lauren studied literature and writing at Central University and has written, acted, directed, and produced the underground film Flick. She is now working to complete her first memoir, All the Pretty Bottles. Please, warm welcome to Lauren Hickman.
This is exciting. Thanks for everybody for showing up, and I'm really grateful to the writer space here in Brooklyn, providing noise machines and a quiet space to get away from the din of the city noises and roommates and dishes and all the things that distracts a person from doing what they love to do sometimes. So this is a piece that been just recently finished up, and it's dedicated to a woman named Dorothy Cunningham, who was a dear mentor and friend of mine for many years. And I just got the news yesterday that she passed away, so felt like this was an appropriate piece for this evening. Oh, and thank you, Anthony, for helping me edit. The nebulous box of our sunken living room was unwelcoming, not only because of the pukey, yellow-green hued shag carpet, but also the uninviting positioning of the furniture, so formal it felt alien. A guest would enter the foyer, look left, cringe, hand a coat off for the front hall's closet, and head for more inviting territory, the kitchen. This useless smoking room in a house of non-smokers felt haunted on all accounts, perhaps by the Dali painting sadly gazing upon the always empty space. Or perhaps it was the witch shadow that chased me to bed every night, this ghosty mass still acknowledged well into my adulthood. Or perhaps the room was inhabited by the spirits of the baby hamsters born there in the shag carpet, born, lay choking, half deformed in the fibrous masses. Born in the heat of escape from the cage, the rock atop is not quite heavy enough to subdue the cry of freedom inherent in all sentient things. Snowball and Coco abandoned their puffy pink squishy offspring only to be half mauled, half eaten by the cat. How sick life is. The joy of keeping pets turned only to horror show and premature expoundings on mortality to wailing children. The room remains haunted by the fleshy extensions of God's will. My mother's delicate fingers untangling the helpless teeny beast from the horrible floor covering. The Dali prints surrounding, his Madonna, fallen, fighting angels, the dancing goddess flower woman bearing witness to this brutal act of fate. A formal sitting room, a silent piano, a table large enough for me to hide under and be forgotten, curling up with cats, spacing out, leaving my body to explore what was outside. The glass carrier, the credenza with a lighted base, housed the blue bottles, the Lalique glass capturing light and shifting blue, turquoise, hazy purple, the crystal turtles, foreign bottles with tiny, clear taped coated decanter lids saving the humans from themselves. A menagerie of blue curves, magnetizing cobalt vessels, all the pretty bottles, glints of light through window pane. The untouchable, forbidden, hand-blown beauties of forged molten silica tinted with minerals, the golden paint filigree weaving romance on tiny vials, tiny lisps and lips, and rotund figures in my frozen memory. The rule-bending wonderment of a child's forbidden brailing of precious objects locked in skeleton-keyed casing. Delicate, handmade, viscous, cold, breakable, careful, nervous, no touching, privilege revoked. Caution, the adults say, those bottles are not meant to be played with, they say. They're for looking. How can seeing be pleasure enough to a child who's still feeling and sensing and sniffing and touching their way through this world to categorize all the new things? They place carefully their new discoveries in the inner fabrics of the mind, making sense of the big place that starts with mom and ends with death. This big world with all the uncertainties and expectations, the unavoidable and the unexpectedness. Adults. And then there was Dorothy, an adult who could see me. She enters and tends to my voids, a grown-up who could see that I was grown up and just in a small body and trying to re-remember the world, How I tired of the misunderstandings of my contemporaries and the presumptive adults who assumed that I was just as small in mind as I was in form. And how it was this magic woman came from Florida to Iowa in her crone years, praised for prince of a landlord who just so happens to be my father, who just so happens to have been getting his hair cut that day by Dorothy's daughter. And so the story was written, so it was told, and how it was that I found my very first friend. She'd stay for weeks with us while our parents would be somewhere far away doing the adult things they did before we three girls came into their care. Dorothy would call in sick for me to school when I'd feign ill, just so I could spend the day watching her, waiting for her to explain to me the nature of the mysteries of the universe that no adult would take the time to uncover with me, offering me packaged answers, rereadings of books written by folks with ulterior motives, only because that's what adults do when they speak to children sometimes. Regurgitate untruths shared to them that then went unexamined in the drudgery of most lives, the quiet desperation of Thoreau's accountants. She would speak to me as equal, and I'd finger her purple robes and gypsy jewelry. She smelled of spicy, sweet incense and carried colorful bags of crystals and trinkets, reminders of her light body. And she always, always had a brown paper sack of lemon drops dusted with powdered sugar. The thing that struck me most was her crystal blue eyes. They sparkled mischief and wonderment. I was certain that she could see my soul, and she would confirm this year after year as she'd make contact with me. She could see me, and she filled the loneliness in my ancient 6-year-old heart. She'd explain the uses of crystals and Schuster cards and why I had freckles, telling me that they were angel's kisses and that I was especially adored as I had so many. She acknowledged my ceremonies and hand gestures, explained to me that I was a spiritual warrior and that my sensitivities were gifts. My emotions were a blessing. And she taught me Vincent's burning and of meditation, and I would stay up too late listening to everything she'd say, although not always understanding why she watched 4-hour films like Shirley MacLaine's Out on a Limb, or Where Tibet Was, or what a silver cord was for. And I'd make moon goddess figures in ceramics class and create flashcards for all the stones and their properties, spending hours trying to capture wishes in the form of incense smoke in those front room bottles. Never able to trap the smoke, only the ashes and resin would remain. Never plan ahead, she'd say. Your job is to live in wonder. I was the type of kid to skip to the ending of a story, read the last page before starting the first, and so this concept of wonderment was unnerving. I wanted to know what was to happen. I wanted to know who I'd be and how I'd be when I was big, what I'd be doing, or how the day ahead was to pan out, but living beyond boundaries? No scheduling? This was antithetical to my upbringing and the squares and slots and systematic layout of the day, the structure, the definition, the certainty. This purple lady was pulling the rug out from under me. And I would later learn that that is what Aquarians do. They ask that you think outside of the box, and that this rebel with a cause was challenging me in early childhood to break with the status quo. She called me her soul buddy. Our favorite errand would be to visit Connections, a metaphysical shop on Maple and 5th Street in Valley Junction. It was better than FAO Schwartz. A small shop with burgundy velvet drapes and dangling chimes from the ceiling, full of books and charms and singing bowls I was forbidden to touch, but when played for me, I was soothed. There were glass dishes of citrine and bloodstone, jade, obsidian, shiny, tiny stones, so good to sink my fingers into, their properties written in perfectly rounded ink on the tiny cards to match. Rose quartz, love, self-worth, compassion. To touch, to explore, and consume everything in that store, it all made me so happy, tickled every sensory switch in my body, sending shivering, confirming intuitive massages up my spine like a tickle from the divine. The store made me so happy. It's my very favorite place. My mother would indulge me and take me to have my palm read there, and the rather normal-looking woman would tell me I would marry a blonde man and have a son, that I was highly sensitive and that I might be a writer someday. But then we stopped going to Connections. Dorothy didn't need to sit us so much that the eldest was older, and I soon forgot about the store in the midst of swimming and dance lessons and the heaviness of impending puberty. Connections closed when the owner transitioned due to complications related to the AIDS virus, an illness explained to me in school by Keith Haring illustrations of yellow hugging humanoids circa 1992. I heard of Dorothy's stroke the same day that I learned my grandmother passed in 2014. She was found on the floor of her treehouse apartment that my father rented to her for nearly 30 years, unattended to for 24 hours. Bravely, I went to visit her only to find myself humbled entirely by the debilitating and personality-voiding phenomenon of a stroke. Humbled isn't the word. Crippled, devastated, brought to my knees. The once vibrant eyes of Dorothy were now vacant. The blue beacons of soul recognition, harbingers of love, light, and understanding, were now as empty as stones. The light had left them. She spoke of me in third person, her tiny left wing held tight to her tiny form, her pink uniform embroidered with the words, "I am Dorothy," the same slogan she'd printed on the rainbow-imbued business cards for as long as I'd known her. Her teeth were gone, whiskers poked out from strange places on her face. Frail, childlike, happy, but confused, she flirted with my boyfriend as I gasped and held back tears. I wanted my mind to wrap itself around the situation with acceptance, as all I could do was reject the truth of old age, sickness, and death. This new reality is that my oldest friend was no longer with me in her full expression. I thanked her from my heart, though she still didn't seem to know who I was. And I led myself to the parking lot to sob loudly, to hold myself in space. The aspirations of that day wiped blank by sorrow and a painful sense of wonder.